Okay, now we'll be going over some structures of the fetus and the veins and arteries that transport nutrients and oxygen from the mother. So first, we will show the umbilical vein. On the fetus, the umbilical vein is going to be red, so it's that red spot right in the middle. And this is one of the instances where veins carry oxygenated blood. So don't always take for granted that arteries always carry oxygenated blood. Sometimes veins do too. So this is the second one that we have to know. And from that umbilical vein, we are going to go to what's called your ductus venosus, which starts right here, and then it goes by that liver, and it'll go up in there, and it's going to attach to the vena cava of the fetus. The reason for that is because the baby doesn't have to detoxify anything and get its own nutrients, so it's all coming from the mother, so it's going right into the bloodstream. The next one is called the foramen ovale of the heart. I'm going to turn this and see if I can't get you guys to see this. That pin is going through that foramen ovale of the heart, and the equivalent structure for the adult is going to be called the fossa ovalis, which is just going to be a really thin part of that inner atrial septum. So now we're going to take an adult heart, and I can show you that ligamentum arteriosum right here, which is the equivalent to that ductus arteriosus on the fetus, and that is going to connect your aorta to your pulmonary arteries right here. The reason for that is that the baby doesn't do its own breathing, so the mother is giving the oxygen, so you don't need it to go to the lungs, so it just bypasses right here in the fetus. And then the last fetal structure you have to know for this lab are your umbilical arteries, and again you can see them in this umbilicus right here, and that's going to be these blue ones right here, these two small ones, and they are deoxygenated because the baby got its oxygen, and then it's bringing the blood back to the placenta down here.
Now we'll take a look at the branches of the thoracic aorta. The first branches off of the aorta will be our right coronary artery, found here, and then our left coronary artery, found here. The third branch will be the brachiocephalic artery. The fourth branch will be the left common carotid artery. And then the fifth branch will be the left subclavian artery. More general, this would be the ascending aorta, part where it's ascending. The arch, that'll be called the aortic arch. And then it will descend and travel downward over here. The next branches off of the aorta will be the vertebral branches. Off of the brachiocephalic artery, you will have a branch ascending up towards your head, and that will be the vertebral artery. There will also be a branch coming off of your left subclavian artery. It'll be over here, and that will ascend up, and that will be your vertebral artery. There is one place that we can see the vertebral artery, and that'll be found right here in the skull. On either side, these will both be the two vertebral arteries. And then the last structure that we need to know will be over here, and that will be an intercostal artery coming off of your aorta.
The next portion of your lab manual is going to be the abdominal aorta and the branches among it. So the first branch of your abdominal aorta that we have to know is your celiac trunk. Your celiac trunk is going to be depicted by these three different vessels right here. And those are just different vessels that we have to know coming off of that. So the first one you have to know is going to be your common hepatic. And that's going to be going off to the right side here, going over to the liver. The liver sits in this region over here. The next one is going to be your left gastric. That is going to be the most superior one. and that is going to go to the left side, or to your stomach on the left side over here. And then the third branch of that celiac trunk is called your splenic artery right here, and that's going to go over to your spleen, which sits in this region. And that splenic artery is very distinguishable because it looks like a curly Q French fry, and it goes over to this side, so you should be able to pick that one out. The next arteries or vessels you have to know are your renal arteries, and those arteries are right here and on the other side over here. Renal because they're going to the kidneys, and that's right here. The next trunk you have to know is your superior mesenteric trunk, and that is going to be right here above that renal vein right there. So your superior mesenteric trunk right here, and you can't see any of the branches off of that. The next one you have to know that you can see on this model is called your inferior mesenteric trunk, and that's going to be down here, and you can also not see any of the branches off of that. The next arteries are called your gonadal arteries, your right gonadal artery right here, and then your left on the other side, both coming straight off of that aorta. And on this model, you cannot see mid-sacral artery or lumbar arteries.
Alright, we're going to be going over some of the structures of the abdominal aorta here. So just to get you guys oriented, this is going to be your spleen over here. This is going to be the pancreas. It's kind of pleated organ here. This is your intestines. These two brown objects are your kidneys. Okay? If I flip this around, you see this object up here. This is the liver, and it looks like Spongebob, so that's why we call this the Spongebob model. Okay? So, this front view, flipping around, going to the back view, so we're looking posteriorly here. We see this first branch here. This is going to be the first branch off of the aorta, so that the first branch off of the abdominal aorta. So then we know that it's the celiac trunk. So this first one coming off is going to be the left gastric. Then this artery coming off, going over to our spleen, is going to be our splenic. So I'm going to turn this up so you can see our splenic artery running all the way over here to the spleen. Okay, so I flip this up. And this last branch coming off here is your common hepatic artery. Okay, so then working our way down, right here we can see our renal artery and our renal vein going to the kidney here. Next branch here is going to be your superior mesenteric trunk. And so then, if I flip this around to our anterior view, this is still the superior mesenteric trunk coming down. These three branches right here, those are going to be your intestinal arteries. Okay, so remember those as your intestinal arteries. Okay, so flipping back to posterior view again. So this is where things get a little bit tricky, but we're going to work it out. Right here, this is going to be your splenic vein. You can see it going out to your spleen, coming back. So that's our splenic vein. This right here is going to be your superior mesenteric vein. And the reason that we know it's a superior mesenteric vein is because the splenic vein has not connected to it yet. If the splenic vein had connected to it, then we would call it the hepatic portal vein, but it's not. So we know that it is the superior mesenteric vein. And we'll see that more clearly on the other model, and I'll explain that again. So going back to an anterior view, one more structure you can see here is your intestinal veins. One more time to a posterior view. So looking at this structure up here, we have the liver. This here is going to be the hepatic portal vein, this purple colored one. This red one here is going to be your hepatic artery. All of the red ones will be. And the blue ones will be your hepatic veins. Alright. So then I'm going to flip over to this other model. This model is showing the same thing. So again, we have our spleen on this side, our intestines on this side, and our pancreas here. So if I flip around to a back view, first branch coming off is our celiac trunk. We have our left gastric artery coming up. We have our common hepatic here, be going out to the liver. And our splenic artery here, going out to the spleen. Next arterial branch is going to be your superior mesenteric branch, right there. If I flip this around to an anterior view, I can again see my intestinal arteries. Okay, so now I'm going to flip posterior again and we're going to go over the veins. So this is where it was tricky. So here we can see that splenic vein coming all the way over and connecting. So that tells us that this is a hepatic portal vein. On the other one, the splenic vein was not connected, so that's why it was the superior mesenteric. But here the splenic vein is clearly connected, making this the hepatic portal vein. We're going to be looking at the vasculature of your head here. So here we see your right vertebral artery. And here we see your left vertebral artery. And those two connect. Right here you can see. This structure here where they've connected is called your basilar artery. Then the next structures that we're going to see on here is your right internal carotid artery and your left internal carotid artery. These structures form what's called an anastomosis, so blood can get into your head from more than one pathway.
We have the arteries of the arm. First one is the axillary, and it's going to continue all the way down to right in here. So this is axillary. Next artery is the brachial. You can see the brachial clearly down here, but you can also trace it all the way up to right in this region where that axillary ends. Next on to the radial. See it right here where it splits from that brachial. You can also see the radial down here as well. Then we have the ulnar. And then lastly for the palmar arches and digital branches. Palmar arches is going to be right here in the palm area. And they're going to branch to the digital branches toward those fingers. You'll see the red going around the fingers. It's the digital branches.
Now we'll take a look at the arteries of the leg. This will be your common iliac artery. It'll break into your external iliac artery and your internal iliac artery. After it passes that inguinal canal, it becomes the femoral artery. And then just know the rest of these that are coming down below the muscles here, that will be the deep femoral artery. As I move down the leg, we'll come back here, and this will be called our popliteal artery. As it passes down the knee, on the lower extremity, this will be called our posterior tibial artery, and that's going to run the whole length of the lower extremity. The first branch off of the posterior tibial will be this branch, and it'll be the anterior tibial. And if I rotate around to the front, this will also be the anterior tibial artery. If I rotate to the back, the second branch off of your posterior tibial artery will be your fibular artery. If I rotate around to the front, we can see our dorsal arches here, and then extending up into our digital branch by the toes. Now we're just going to do an overview of the vessels on this model. Starting here, this will be the ascending aorta. You can see it coming up. And then as it curves here, that'll be the aortic arch. Then as it comes down, that'll be called the descending aorta. That first branch off the aortic arch, or the third branch off of the aorta, will be the brachiocephalic artery. The second branch will be the left common carotid artery. And then the third branch will be the left subclavian artery. If I rotate this model slightly, we can see that internal carotid artery here. If I rotate back, we'll look at the veins. Right here will be the cephalic vein. Then over on this side, underneath the arm, that will be the axillary vein. Looking in the middle here, this will be the superior vena cava. Coming off of that, regionally, this will be the brachiocephalic vein. And you have two of those, a left and a right. So right beside, on either side, that'll be the brachiocephalic vein. Farther over, underneath the clavicle, that'll be the right subclavian vein. And you also have a left subclavian vein. This branch here will be called the internal jugular vein. And then this branch here will be the external jugular vein. Looking in the ribs, we can see these arteries here. They're coming off of the aorta, and that will be called our intercostal arteries. And then the vein of note in here will be the hemiazygos vein. And then once passing below the diaphragm, which would be found here, we'll get into that abdominal aorta. The first trunk off of your abdominal aorta will be the celiac trunk, and that'll be this structure here. A branch off of the celiac trunk will be our hepatic artery. Another branch will be our left gastric artery. And the last branch will be the splenic artery. The next structure will be that superior mesenteric trunk, and that'll be found here. And then going more inferior, you'll find the inferior mesenteric trunk here. A few other structures, we can see our renal arteries on both sides. That'll be found here. And likewise on the other side, as well as our renal vein, which will be found here. The next structure will be our gonadal artery, and that'll be these shoestring-like structures here. And then moving more inferiorly, we'll have our common iliac arteries here and here. our common iliac arteries will split into the external iliac artery here and the internal iliac artery here. If we go to the veins of this region, we will find our inferior vena cava here, and that's going to split into our common iliac vein found here. That further splits into our external iliac vein found here, or our internal iliac vein found here. Passing through that inguinal canal, we can find our femoral artery, and then this little artery found right here, that is going to be called our deep femoral artery. Going to the other leg, we can see our femoral vein here. And then the last structure that we need to find is the great saphenous vein here.
Alright, so what we're looking at here is the liver, and this is the way it sits in the stand, so it's a little confusing. But in your body, the liver actually sits just like this, okay? And the reason we know that is because if I turn this around, so now I'm looking from a posterior view. Here we can see your inferior vena cava, so you know that runs up and down. Okay, so just get yourself oriented by finding that inferior vena cava. Okay, so now I'm going to flip the model up. So now they've cut away large sections of the liver, so we can see inside here. Here's our inferior vena cava still. This is going to be our hepatic portal vein, and this is going to bring blood from the intestines and other parts of the abdominal cavity up to the liver to get filtered. This is going to be our hepatic artery, bringing blood to the liver so that the liver is oxygenated, just like any other organ in the body. And the blue is the hepatic veins. So the hepatic veins bring deoxygenated blood back to the inferior vena cava. And here is your gallbladder. This here is your ligamentum teres. It's the remnants of your ductus venosus.